Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Joe Mather. I am a functional medicine practitioner in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I've been looking forward to this call for a few weeks. I have with me Travis Moorfield. Hey, Travis.
Hey,
And Travis and I worked together for about a year from 2022 to 2023. So this has been such a treasure and a delight catching back up with Travis. Travis came in to see me, and he had been previously diagnosed with something I'm seeing more and more of, and that's called CIU, or chronic idiopathic urticaria, and complicated by another condition called angioedema, which is particularly a horrible, itchy swelling that can happen in the deeper layers of the skin. He had some GI issues, which he'll mention as well, and he really had run out of options, was really hurting. And he got quite well, and he did phenomenally with a couple tools that I see help a lot of patients. And he was kind enough to join us today to share about that. So Travis, thank you again for being here. And to jump in, help people understand what you were feeling like before you came in to see me. What did your symptoms look like, and where were you in your life?
ooh, getting to you was a journey. Before I saw you, I was eating anywhere from 600 to 1,000 calories a day because that's all I could get down. I
Yeah.
was actually losing consciousness from eating and having to recover. I was on disability from work, and that's on a work from home position. I was not even able to log on and work. The mental capacity wasn't there. I couldn't go out into the sunlight for more than a couple minutes without breaking out into hives. If I had to look for something around my house, just walking around for sometimes more than 30 or 40 seconds or going up the stairs more than once or twice, I would start to feel these waves of heat, hives start coming out. Also, things like doing the dishes, mowing the lawn. I couldn't do things with my hands that really put any sort of pressure on them, or staying on my
Sure.
feet for too long because the angioedema would start to come out. So my day to day really was spending most of the day either in bed or on the couch trying to get through my food reactions and trying to keep everything under control without really realizing what was going on.
And thank you for sharing. And just hearing you brings back those first couple of visits, and you were in a real bad place. And one of the reasons I'm so happy that you're sharing the story is that I think CIU, angioedema, chronic hives, chronic fatigue, these can be symptoms can be so disabling and almost life ending for patients that a lot of people don't have much hope that they can get better. And it's been such a joy to watch you heal and get better over time. Really just fun, and just what makes me love functional medicine so much. Thank you for sharing where you were. I'll keep some of my thoughts because I want the story to be on you. When you first came in and we started working together, what were some of the initial treatments that hit the mark? Because you started getting better within a relatively short period of time. Um,
Yeah, so my CIU started in June of 2013, and it started out as kind of a nuisance, but I saw some allergists, I saw a few doctors. They just called it idiopathic. I went through all the allergy tests, went through some
yeah,
food
right.
tests, and they could not make any sense of it. So they considered it somewhat benign. And then it wasn't until mid 2014 when I had a scare where I was driving and I started fading and losing consciousness. I had to pull over, had a really bad hive reaction, and I was out of state too. So that just adds
Scary.
complications.
Yeah.
So then when I got back home, I reached out to my then allergist who started me on Xolair injections. And this is when it was FDA approved for asthma, but not
Mhm.
urticaria. And so I was at kind of the leading edge of that
It
where
is now. Yeah, right.
it is now, yes.
And
But
it
back
can
in
help, right? Yeah.
Yes. And it
Yep.
did help me initially. Back in, I want to say early 2015 is when I started it. And
Hmm.
something extremely strange happened where after a couple months of taking it, and I was getting injections about monthly,
Right.
my hives had actually started to lighten for the first time in several years, and I was feeling pretty good in general. And then after about 3 weeks of getting the injections, anytime I would eat food, I would start to feel this wave of tingling go over me, lightheadedness. I couldn't focus. And then I actually started to have panic attacks after eating food. And I did not understand what was happening. I would reach out to my doctor and she would say, "Oh, come get another injection." And then I would be good for
Yeah.
another like 3 weeks. This went on for several months where I would need to get injections within a certain amount of time frame. Otherwise, my food reactions would get so bad. And it eventually got to a point where it was getting worse every single time I was getting the injections. So I ended up saying like, okay, that's enough. Like, we got to try something else. That doctor ended up referring me to the head of immunology and allergy at Northwestern. Being in the Chicagoland area, you'd think that'd be a pretty good,
You're in.
range of doctors to go through. Yes. So I ended up seeing him, and he ended up knowing that it was something with mast cells, gave me several different types of prescription medications to help with
Mhm.
it. It only made my symptoms worse. Everything he gave me made me either depressed, gave me suicidal thoughts, didn't help, made me so tired and lethargic that I wasn't even myself. You know, go through that iteration, basically every doctor that I saw. And those were the doctors that helped me. That does not include the rheumatologists, the GI doctors, the neurologists, the hematologists, the other allergists that I saw that ended up coming up basically inconclusive. That's
Man,
kind of what it looked like before I saw you.
I'm so glad that you had the courageousness level was high to keep pushing, because a lot of patients get stuck years before I think you pressed on.
Yeah, I had
Um,
a lot of doctors in the area to go through, and I think from the time this all started to the time to where I am now, I've seen between 35 and 40 different doctors.
oh, that high. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a lot of docs.
I kept starting over at the beginning, kept trying to get answers, and yeah,
Yeah, for patients listening, the type of severity of reactions that Travis was having directly after eating is always mast cell activation, right? And so if you're stuck and you're having that degree of symptoms right after you eat, the lightheadedness, the tingling, right? That is very classic for mast cell, and that should give a big hint to your functional medicine doctor about what might be going on. So you struggled for a long time to try to find an answer, and eventually, as things got worse, you needed more and more, and you tried medications that didn't help. Some helped initially, but weren't the answer. Maybe we're
right.
covering up some underlying issues, but giving you some relief for a time. You came in to work with me, and what do you recall on what I told you in the first visit or two, or what I had you start with? Do you remember?
I remember one of the first things we talked about was how dedicated I was to getting help because a lot of the treatment does come down to the individual and the patient. And you needed to make that clear from the beginning. And I wanted to make it clear that I was out of options and was willing to work with you 100%. That's the number one thing I remember from our initial conversation. But the thing you told me that really stuck with me with my condition is this isn't permanent. You can get over this. And that to me, I had not heard that from anyone. And I thought that I was going to live with this. And I honestly, it felt like it was going to eventually kill me. At my worst, I ended up losing 50 pounds within 4 months because I could not eat enough food.
Yeah, I
So,
remember you were really malnourished when you first came in, down on
yes,
quite a lot, because
yes.
you even had it down to the number of calories that you could eat before you would basically almost collapse. I mean,
And that was one to
really
200
flare symptoms.
calories at my worst. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Man, okay, so the reason why I told you this could get better is that the things that cause these problems you hadn't really been treated, right?
Right.
From my perspective, you hadn't had proper gut support, right? So we doubled down on gut support. We doubled
Yep.
down on a low histamine diet. We doubled down on comprehensive probiotic therapy, right? And
Yes.
then that was one of the big things that gave you inch by inch more resiliency so that we could add on top of it.
Correct.
I
And,
think you
and
said,
I wanted to just ask with that initial diagnosis and treatment, before I saw you, I was diagnosed positively for SIBO
mhm,
and saw my GI doctor and went through that. I got treated for SIBO. Did any of that
four
help?
times,
Yes, four
right?
times. Yep. Did any of that help correlate, or was that immediately when you saw SIBO, you knew like red flag, this all makes sense, this all, looks like MCAS?
Well, CIU, so CIU, angioedema, chronic hives, idiopathic hives, however you want to call it, In my world, in my experience, it's caused by dysbiosis and SIBO as number one, right? Not the most common, but that's one reason it can happen. The most common is mold exposure, right? So mold exposure and mold toxicity are kind of the thing that's missed all the time. And I just see this disease as mold until proven otherwise in my brain. And those two things really add together and make the third cause and problem, which is the limbic system dysregulation. So as the body becomes so threatened from the malnutrition and from the inflammation of the mast cells, right, it cycles in on itself and the body goes into a defensive protective crouch. And then it
Yes.
starts reacting to more. And so the key for treatment is, can you do enough to support the gut, right? We did that. Can you address any toxic burden using binders, right? In our case, you had a positive mold test. It wasn't hugely positive, but
Right.
enough for us to be concerned, right? Can you get the toxin and the mold level down? And then can you heal the limbic system? And that was
And that's Gupta.
and that's the Gupta program,
Oh
right?
yeah. And I still, I mean, God, we're talking 2.5 or no, a year and a half later
Huh?
after I
Yeah.
initially signed up. And yeah, I still use Gupta, still go through the practices. And now instead of applying it to just my chronic illness, I get to apply it to everyday stressful situations and work and life in general. And
It's
it's awesome.
it's such a great tool, and I wish I knew about it when I was before I was sick with mold, and just to be a better human being.
Me too.
And so
Yeah.
those of us who've had limbic problems, I think, can resonate. And so if you're struggling and you've been chronically ill, take a look at Ashok's program. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Do you want to comment anything about the low histamine probiotics, Gupta? Those were fundamental pieces that I threw at you day one. Anything else there that you remember from the early days?
No, I have largely stuck with. So, one strange thing is I still do not have a sense of hunger after all of this. And so I have kind of adopted this fasting schedule where I kind of go 18 hours without eating, 6 hours with, or sometimes 20 and 4 on like a really busy work day. That's
Mm-hmm.
worked for me,
Yeah.
but I have largely stuck with a low histamine diet since. And I have limited my food variety intentionally using those basic guidelines that you gave me a year and a half ago. But no, I've kind of leaned into and accepted it as kind of a new pseudo lifestyle. And
Mm.
it's something that now appeals to me. It's not, I didn't really treat it as something I had to
We
temporarily do and then step
you
out
told me
of.
at our first visit together that you always felt better fasting, right? And that's another big red
Yes.
flag, right? That the gut, that the mast cells are likely an issue. And so leaning into that is probably a good thing. It's been a year since I got my hands on you clinically.
Yeah.
And probably if this were a patient visit, then I would be talking about ways that we can expand your diet, right? Because that might be the next piece that you need to get your resiliency that much higher, Travis. And so
Yeah.
let me see if I can recall kind of the next steps, what happened to you clinically. So you started gaining a little bit by little bit, month by month. And about 2 months in, you had like a 60-hour period with no hives. And so at that point, I felt like we had finally kind of turned a corner a little bit. Like we'd made enough progress that we could start asking you to do a little bit more.
Yes.
And the next things I had you do high protein diets.
Let
Um,
Real quick about the hive
please.
thing.
Yeah.
I that is such a big deal for me because I will say from probably at some point in 2015 or around there until that day in 2022, like whatever it was,
Yeah.
September, August, whatever it was in 2022. So
Yeah.
for about 7 years, I am not joking when I say over 99% of every day, most days of
Wow.
most years, between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., I would get these waves of heat. I would get flush. I would start to break out. And that was every night. My circadian rhythm would kick off something. I
Yeah.
would have these breakouts and I literally could not go to sleep until they were over. I would either have to ice down, I would have to stay up, I would be miserable. So that 60 hours was literally the first time I had more than a 2 day break from hives in like 7 years. It was
And
huge. It was huge.
and I think that was the thing that finally convinced you that you could get better. And then I think you kind of doubled down on the mast cell support that we were doing, the gut work we were doing, the Gupta program that we are doing, and that allowed you to climb all the way out and keep getting better. We needed
Yes.
that. We needed that time, and because it was the first time where I think the limbic system could go, oh, wait a minute, I don't need to panic every moment of every day because I'm in constant fear and pain. I
Yeah.
things can be okay, right?
It was honestly, I think it was near the end. So the Gupta program, I treated that as my Monday through Friday. Do it as much as I could until I was out of energy, and then that was it for the day. I got
Right.
through the Gupta program in about, I want to say 2, 3 months, and my hives started going away after 2, 3 months. That's not coincidence.
It's not. It's not.
Yeah.
I think that limbic problems drive mast cell, and this is one of the large things I see in a lot of patients. I'm so glad you stuck with that. You
Yeah.
you got better, kind of slowly, steadily. We're kind of moving up. We began working together in June, and you had made kind of month by month progress till the end of the year, where I think you had a little bit of a setback. I think we were pushing too hard,
Yes.
but little by little, you got back, and so you went from just barely living. I don't think you were working at this point. Back to working full time. I think in January of 23. Is that right?
Yeah. So in August of 21, I went on disability, and I was on disability and was not able to work until I saw you in June. And
Yeah.
then think about this. I was on disability, could not work in that 9 month period. But within 4 months of you treating me, I was able to get back to work part time by the end of October of
I know.
22.
So great.
So, like, think of that. Think of those numbers. By
Yeah.
the end of 4 months compared to 9 months of me being just down and out. And then,
Bedbound.
yes, from the end of October to the beginning of January 23, I was on part time. And from January 23 till now, I've been back full time work.
That's awesome. I'm so happy for you, Travis. This is what healing is like. And I can have all the ideas in the world, but it takes a patient to have some dedication to do it. And I have
Yes.
patients who sometimes hear me talk about Gupta, and they just don't want to do it, and they struggle. Or I may say, I really think you need these probiotics for XYZ reason, and they may kind of not really do it or do it sometimes. And you were the exact opposite, right? If something worked, we would know because you were doing it. If
Yeah.
something didn't work, we also knew, so we could stop doing those things.
Yeah.
And can I talk about binders for a little bit? Because this is an
Oh,
interesting
absolutely.
piece, right? You
Yeah.
had a mildly positive mold test with no real big source of mold exposure, right? But I had come into this case knowing that mold toxicity, I've just seen people move into a moldy house and get CIU, they move somewhere else and it settles down, right? I saw again and again, if I treat the mold, people tend to get better. And you followed that path to an extent. I got you on binders, right? And from the beginning, when we did a mold test to about I don't think it was 6 or 9 months later when repeated, your mold toxins went down,
Right.
right? But if we went too high on the binders, you would get worse.
Yes.
And eventually, when we got the toxins down, not all the way gone, but down, and we took the binders away, what happened?
Oh, I ended up feeling like a new person from that point on.
Yes, because treatments that are helpful in the beginning aren't always helpful in the end.
Right.
And
And you had warned me about that, and you were really concerned, I remember early on, about kind of, if you will, our throttle control of binders, really asking me to pay attention and check in with myself. And we got to see exactly why, because come like January of 23 or wherever around it
yeah,
was, we had gone too hard, too
yep.
fast. And as soon as I started backing off, and yeah, you're
You just took
absolutely
off.
right.
Your
Yeah,
symptoms. I think you sent me a message or an email, but I have a quotation where you're like, "Oh my god, I went down the binders and I'm back." You're like, "I'm
turned
feeling
a
so good."
corner. Yeah,
Yeah,
I turned a
it took
corner.
another level up. And
Yeah,
so it's just so important. Even though mold causes CIU, it does not mean that the treatment is max binders, right? We got to respect the patient. And the thing about binders is, yes, do they bind ochratoxin and trichothecene and gliotoxin? Of course, yes, they do. And slowly they can bring those down. But they also bind a lot of other things, like polysaccharides. I think toxins, they can accumulate in the gut, metals, right? And so, although we use it kind of in a mold centric way, and for a lot of my patients and a lot of patients that come see me are kind of like mold binders, they're doing more than that. And so they may be doing things under the surface that may just not be appropriate for everybody. So it's just another example of why we want to just treat the patient and not the theory. I love that. I'm so glad we got to talk about that. But a conversation with Travis Moorfield would not be complete if we didn't talk about the thing I think that kind of where you took the final step forward, and that was the Wim Hof, the cold exposure, and the progressive exercise.
Oh yeah.
And I'm going to steal a little thunder because I just loved your response to this. I've seen this a couple of times where a patient who's been chronically ill and then they get better and better and better. If I ask them to do Wim Hof or exercise too soon, they crash and burn. But if they do it at the right time when they've built some resiliency, they rocket up and
Yep.
then they just are off to the races. And that happened with you. And so please tell people
Yeah.
about Wim Hof.
Oh man. Okay. The first time I did the Wim Hof breathing, it really actually terrified me a little because it caused a pretty severe urticaria reaction. I knew it was doing something to my body, but I felt like I was also ready for whatever. So
Wim
after
Hof, for people
doing,
who don't know, are a series of you hyperventilate and then breath hold, and he'll have those exercise paired with cold exposure, cold showers or ice plunges. He's called the Iceman. There's a cool documentary on Netflix, and I introduced. Would I tell this to you, or did you hear about him and then ask about the treatment?
no, that was all you. I had
Oh,
never
okay.
heard about him until you.
Oh, awesome. So the
Yeah.
first time, the first time you got worse, but you stuck with it,
The
or
first time,
you dialed
oh
it down.
no, this is the thing though. It had me feeling great in terms of like it gave me a really good just dopamine rush. Just doing the breath hold, getting into the cold shower, I could tell I was feeling good, but my symptoms, like I had hives. The good thing about cold showers with me is that heat brings on my urticaria, so cold
Yes.
showers has always been kind of something I've done, but I've only, when I talk cold showers before Wim Hof, it's like I'll get in for like 20 seconds and it's like, okay, yeah, the cold feels good. No. With Wim Hof, it's when I started doing the breathing that first night, I had a pretty bad urticaria response, but I got into a cold shower right away and I thought, okay, this has me feeling good. It felt like kind of a trial. So then I gave it a couple days break, went back into it, did the same exact breathing routine, did the same exact cold shower, had almost no hives come out that second
Mhm.
time. Even that second time, the cold shower even felt more exhilarating. And from that
Yes.
point on, I was able to do it multiple times a week. And in the first year from that starting point, that first calendar year, I ended up taking over 500 cold showers.
Oh
Um,
wow, awesome! I didn't know that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I ended up
The
doing on average throughout the week 2 cold showers a day. And before each cold shower, I'd do my Wim Hof breathing. So I did Wim Hof
okay.
breathing. I still do it every morning when I wake up. I start with Wim Hof breathing and a cold shower, 3 minutes of cold exposure. And then after my exercise, more Wim Hof breathing, 3 more minutes of cold exposure. So I get around 30 to 40 minutes of cold exposure every week now, whether it's natural exposure outside if it's cold enough or a cold shower, which is great.
There's, I, I think what's happening is that when people have been ill, uh, their tolerance for stressors goes down. So this is almost like weight training with stressful stimuli, and it can help the body understand that not every stressful stimulus is the end of the world. Not every stressful stimulus needs a huge mast cell response, right? A huge sympathetic outpouring. The
Yes.
body is made to be tough, right? We evolved as hunter gatherers, roaming around half naked, half starved all the time. And we've got it pretty easy right now. And so I think sometimes our body just needs to be reminded that it's stronger than it needs to be, particularly when we've been sick for a while, right? So
Yes.
that's where I really just do enjoy torturing patients with cold showers.
Oh man, I look forward to them every day now. And like if I go a day without a cold shower, I feel like something's missing because it really does give you the energy and focus like that you need. The other interesting thing, the way you're talking about how, yeah, not all stressors and stuff are bad. When I
Right.
first started doing the Wim Hof breathing and I had that reaction, at the same time, I was just trying to get back into doing regular exercise.
That's right.
And in we're talking October of 22, right before I went back to work part time, I tried some cardio and I literally could do about 5 minutes of cardio,
I
and it
remember
knocked
that.
me on my butt for
Out for a
about two
week.
weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was trying, after that bout of just kind of feeling exhausted after doing just 5 minutes of cardio, it was very shortly after that that you had me do Wim Hof. So it makes sense that my body was like kind of primed at any sort of physical exertion to have urticaria. Because when I
Yeah.
start doing cardiovascular activity, I will get hives.
That
So
that's
when I,
that's and by the way, that's extremely common, not just for you, but for other
ah,
people with CIU. That's it's a devastating, very because people then get out of shape and they get deconditioned, and then
yep,
all sorts of other problems can set in. So
yep,
finding a tool that allows us to then be able to tolerate exercise is critical. And the progressive exercise therapy, where I have people just go under their threshold where they're going to have symptoms and then slowly work their way up. That's another way around this problem for the people who maybe aren't as interested for the cold showers or the breath work, right? So we've got lots of tools, and man, healing from this sort of thing is so much fun to help patients, because I get to see patients like you who do so well when they've struggled. So thank you so much for jumping in and working with me. It's been such a blast catching up. Is
yeah.
there anything you wanted to share with any patient out there who's struggling with chronic fatigue, chronic hives, chronic gut? Anything you wish you could have told yourself when you were in the middle of being really sick?
To be perfectly honest, I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what doctors were out there to help me. So my advice to people is if you come across a doctor who seems like they know they've experienced this in another patient, do yourself a favor and trust them initially. Because if I wouldn't have gone into our working relationship with 100% trust, I feel like I would not have ever seen the results that I did. And the fact that I was dealing with a doctor who recognized and believed my symptoms, uh, it's funny that that's what I that's what I had to find in order to get help.
Yeah.
Up until finding you, I had doctors who straight up either didn't believe me or couldn't find conclusions and kept running me through tests, kept pushing it off, kept prescribing different medicines that weren't doing anything. And I kept spinning my wheels when really I probably should have been looking for other avenues, but I simply did not know where to
You
look.
didn't know. Yeah.
I feel like, especially with long COVID, I feel like with MECSF or
Yes.
the chemical
Yes.
exposure, all that
Yes.
stuff, I feel like that now that the public has a little bit more knowledge and exposure on these kind of illnesses in general, I'm hoping that doctors like you are going to be easier to find. When people find a doctor like you, they need to listen to you and try what you have to say 100%. And if
Thank you,
it doesn't
Travis.
work, then they get to push back a little bit. That's where I'm coming from because of the results I've
Yeah.
seen.
That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy to see you back into your life, and that's why we do this. That's why you put in the work, is so that you can get back to your life and enjoy it.
Yeah,
I can't let that last comment go without getting on my soapbox, which is if you're a patient, you're struggling with chronic fatigue, chronic hives, any sort of chronic illness, and a doctor, conventional or functional, is just running you through tests, you probably need to find another doctor, because tests don't make you feel better. They can never make you feel better. It's just an information gathering. The better approach is to find the tools that have helped patients like you and try them one at a time. The test should be the treatment, or the treatment should be the test, right? Something's going to work or it's not going to work, right? If you hadn't responded to the low FODMAP diet and probiotics, then that would have told me that the gut didn't need work. We would have moved right on.
right.
And that it's just a simple, practical matter of finding a doctor who's going to be willing to go the distance and use the treatments in the right order practically. That's all healing is. And I think people make this way too complicated.
Yeah. And speaking of, I luckily, when I first had my really bad food reactions, I found a local doctor here who did trust me. He was willing to work with me. And
Yeah.
when you are very early on in our working relationship, you recommended the book Toxic to me, and I brought a copy with me to the doctor's office. When I was in the waiting room, or when I was in the doctor's office room with him, he opened up his phone and bought a copy and says, "I'm going to read it." Like
That
that's the
is the
kind of
sign of a
support.
winner. You keep
Yes.
that doctor. If you're a patient and your doctor does something like that, you
Yep.
found someone who really wants their patients to get better, and you hold on to them.
Yep, exactly. So I told him I was going to buy him a copy of the book and be like, "Hey, read chapter 5. That's MCAS."
For the
Like,
MCAS chapter, yeah.
yeah, right. So, but no, he bought the book right there with me in the room and ended up reading it. And he was my support system for all the disability stuff with work, my employer, and all that stuff. And he kind of bridged the
Beautiful.
gap with all the local things I could do versus like you being remote. So if you do find a local doctor like that, man, yeah, hang
Yep.
on to him.
One of the reasons I love my new role in just a plain old family practice doctor who sees complex illness, and it just makes my day to be able to do that with patients. And thank you for trusting me and working with me. And it's been such a joy catching up, Travis. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been great, and I don't know where I would be without your treatment and the help that
Well,
you've given me. It's
you
been
just
awesome.
keep going, make the world a better place, and we just keep paying it forward.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you.
All right, thanks.